The Russia-Ukraine war completed 6 months this week. Since the war began, the threat of a nuclear calamity has been looming large. Days into the invasion, Russian forces took control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest nuclear facility. In recent weeks, the fears of a nuclear catastrophe have been renewed, following intense shelling in and around the nuclear plant located in Ennahda. Both warring sides blame each other for the escalation in attacks near the facility, increasing fears of a catastrophe that could affect nearby towns in southern Ukraine or potentially an even wider region. For a region that has witnessed the world's worst nuclear disaster in 1986, the fears are palpable.
Multiple strikes at the territory of the station showed us that they precisely targeted and attacked the storages of nuclear waste and storages of nuclear isotopes. They are located closely to the reactors. You should understand that in case the reactor is hit, it will not be a local but a global catastrophe.
Multiple parties, including UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, have called for the immediate demilitarization of the plant, citing the potential for a serious and widespread nuclear disaster.
Any actions that might endanger the physical integrity, safety or security of the nuclear plant are simply unacceptable. Any further escalation of the situation could lead to self-destruction.
The IAEA has urged the relevant parties to provide immediate, secure and unfettered access to the nuclear site.
I reiterate that the military actions that have even the smallest potential to jeopardize nuclear safety or nuclear security at such a nuclear installation must stop immediately. These actions could lead us to serious consequences.
As fighting continues, what's the biggest risk to Zaporizhzhia? How can the potential disaster be averted now and in the future? That's the global debate. Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teena. In fact, I'm pleased to welcome an illustrious panel today to discuss the increased risks at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in the wake of escalating attacks around it and the larger ambit of nuclear safety and security worldwide. Dr. Robert Rosner, William E. Rather Distinguished Service Professor, Departments of Astronomy and Astrophysics and Physics at the University of Chicago. Dr. Paul Dorfman, Associate Fellow, Science Policy Research Unit, Sussex Energy Group, University of Sussex. Dr. Rajiv Nayan, Senior Research Associate, Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. And Dr. Jonathan Cobb, Senior Communication Manager, World Nuclear Association. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this edition of the Global Debate on Sansad TV. Dr. Dorfman, allow me to begin the program today with you. Let's first get the current scenario into the picture and the emerging threat at what's happening at the Zaporizhzhia power plant in Ukraine. Ever since Russia seized the power plant, there was an imminent fear of a nuclear calamity. In recent weeks, that threat, that fear has only renewed because of the kind of escalation in attacks that we have seen. Now the recent reports say that the power plant has been disconnected from the national power grid. How do you assess the situation that is only going from bad to worse? What kind of impact could it have on the region and the world at large?
There is a fragile power connection to Zaporizhzhia, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, that's being maintained paradoxically by the Ukrainians. Now, the point about power supply to a nuclear power plant is to cool the reactor and, critically, the high radiation spent fuel pods. If that goes down, then there's reliance on backup generators, which then could go wrong as well. If something really goes wrong in the fog of war, and let's face it, Russia is an unstable actor, the ensuing radiation pollution could go to Europe, could go to Russia, could go as far as the Middle East. This is a very dangerous situation.
Dr. Rosner, both sides are blaming each other for the increased shelling. Now, in this worsening situation, what are some of the most serious concerns, some of the vulnerabilities that you see at the Zaporizhzhia power plant?
So the probably the most serious immediate issue are the cooling ponds, where the spent fuel is being stored. There's quite a bit of spent fuel present there. Relatively little of that has moved to dry cask storage. And the cooling ponds themselves are really not at all protected against, for example, rocket or artillery fire. The reactors themselves are far better protected because you have a concrete containment building as well as, of course, the pressure vessel itself. The cooling ponds tend to be very poorly protected because under normal circumstances, they're not really threatened by anything. The main protection typically is simply security, basically preventing people from gaining access to the cooling ponds, but certainly not against bombardment. If the cooling ponds are hit, then a variety of things can happen. One is just immediately dispersal of nuclear materials. Mm-hmm. If the spent fuel is directly hit, that would impact an area of tens of kilometers around the reactor site. More critically would be if the means by which the cooling ponds are kept cool, if those are damaged, then you might end up in a regime of what actually happened in Fukushima Daiichi, which is that the spent fuel, unfortunately, that's sitting in the cooling ponds is in that water precisely because it has to be cooled. And if the water isn't cooled, kept at reasonable temperatures, it will evaporate. It will start exposing the spent fuel rods, and then you might have all sorts of very unfortunate things happening, including potential fire, including because there's hydrogen being released, and that would spread radioactive material over a much, much larger area. Very much of what we just heard from Dr. Paul Dorfman.
Dr. Jonathan Kopp, coming to you for your view, as the situation worsens amid increased risks and fears of, of a nuclear calamity, has it revived fears of a Chernobyl-like disaster?
They're two very different things. So at Chernobyl, they were an RBMK reactor, and that failed because of the poor design of the reactor. It created a runaway increase in power at the reactor, and that caused an explosion. And because that reactor didn't have the kind of containment dome that Dr. Rosner was referring to a moment ago, that was free released into the atmosphere, very high altitudes, and that spread widely over Europe. Now, that's not the situation with the reactors Zaporizhzhia. They have that containment zone, and that is one of the key differences. So it has been compared by some to, 6 Chernobyls could happen here. That's not the specific case, but that's not to rule out the very serious attention that should be to this plant and to resolving the situation there. And that's why I think it's absolutely urgent that the IAEA are granted access immediately and can visit in the next few days, as their DG has suggested he wants and intends to do, so they can establish the facts there. And that's not only for the way the reactors are being run, but another key thing that we want attention paid to is the treatment of the workers on the plant, because there have been some very concerning reports about the way in which those workers are being treated by the Russian forces, and they're already operating in very difficult conditions. And they also live nearby, they travel to and from work, and those areas where they are being working, that is the plant, that's where the Russian forces are, but where they're living, those locations, those homes have often been subject to shelling in recent days and weeks, and that is a significant concern for us.
Okay, so whether the IAEA mission is the most effective strategy going forth, to mitigate the current crisis is something that I'll come back to you and take perspectives from all three of you. But Dr. Rajiv Nayan, the fact that, the world has seen nuclear disasters prior to this, which have either been man-made due to human error or because of a natural calamity, something that we saw at Fukushima. Perhaps this is the first instance wherein a civil nuclear facility comes under military attack. So does that elevate the current risk and, perhaps increase risk to what the world has already seen?
No, there is good side and the bad side of this crisis. The bad news is that, yes, they are not taking care of the existence of power plant and they are fighting a war. And they are shelling. Both are agreed that the shelling is taking place. The only issue is that both are accusing each other that other side is selling on near or not on the complex of the nuclear power plant. This is very sad side. But good side is that at least all the parties, both sides, are not in favor of endangering nuclear power plant. So both are trying to accept their responsibilities. Both are accusing, no doubt about it. So what has happened that even yesterday, if you read the Russian account, they'll say, okay, they admit that they are controlling. They are providing physical protection and they even claim that it is basically sabotaged by Ukrainians, by Kyiv, and they have arrested some people, 36 number they are putting forward. And in fact, they are protecting. But at least normatively, they are saying that they are protecting and they are not allowing. Second thing is, like just how we are concerned, several times it came to the limelight, or it came to the news that that external power supply or power outage, whatever we want to call it, had happened, but it had not happened before. This time, all admit that, yes, disruption had taken place. And that was 750 kilowatt power supply, original supply, which was going to the power plant, was disrupted. And now, even both sides are saying, now we have worked together. I mean, very interestingly, Russians are also saying that we have worked together to provide alternative power supply, and that is 330 kV. So at least the good side is that both are willing to work together. Even if they are fighting a war, they are accusing each other. And another very good side, or you can say the bright side of this entire scenario, entire situation, is that all are trying to bring IAEA in. And IAEA is coming as an honest mediator, you can say, broker, you can say, or an agency, you can say, which is willing to provide some kind of assistance. Whether that kind of assistance is coming or not coming, but it is at least struggling to bring the sanity there. So this is the situation there. So yes, of course.
Okay. So
it is a matter of grave concern. All of us agree. The international community is really worried, and we are talking about United Nations and United Nations Secretary General.
Certainly, Dr. Nayan, the situation is critical, as all four of you have pointed out, and this has led to heightened alarm, prompting international leaders to, urge for quick demilitarization, which of course is not going to happen because Russia has completely denied it. The other option being the IAEA mission being sent to the site to assess the situation and perhaps, bring down the risks. Dr. Dorfman, how convinced are you that the IAEA mission could mitigate the current risk, bring down the risk, considering the fact that the nuclear watchdog has never faced a situation like this, that a nuclear power plant has to operate in a war zone?
Let's be clear, as you discussed, this is the first time that a nuclear power plant has come under direct attack. The fact that Russia may wish to connect back to Russia is also deeply problematic. Russia is, let us be clear, an invading force here. There is a nuclear power plant under attack. The consequences of this could be catastrophic. Now, in terms of IAEA, it would be hugely important for the IAEA to come in and attempt to try to mitigate the problems associated with this appalling situation. However, let's note that the IAEA have never spoken, never regulated, and have never advised for the question of nuclear attack in the context of reactor design. So the IAEA are now wringing their hands over an issue that they've long forgotten and long not addressed. The key takeaway to all of this is this: the fact that civil nuclear can be weaponized. And the reality, both in Ukraine, in Europe, in Russia, in India, everywhere, in an increasingly unstable world, we need to consider this new appalling reality and think it through. If you go to a doctor with a problem, you don't expect the doctor to say, oh, everything's fine, don't worry about it, things will be okay. What you want is for the doctor to diagnose the problem and help treat it, and not trivialize it, and not say, well, okay, there's good and bad about this. The reality is, there is nothing good about this situation.
Absolutely. So maybe, the current situation may be panning out in Zaporizhzhia today, and it's between Ukraine and Russia. But that's a significant point, Dr. Rosna, that Dr. Dorfman makes, that civil nuclear can be weaponized, and that is something that the world should really be concerned about. Do any of the conventions under the IAEA address the current situation where civil nuclear facility comes under military attack?
So you're raising a very important issue. And at the heart of it is that a nuclear power plant is, quite frankly, a huge asset to whoever controls it. And as Paul Dorfman just pointed out, the Russians have a strategic interest in the power plant, namely to disconnect it from the Ukrainian grid and to connect it to the Russian grid. That means that the power plant is not just a pawn in the struggle between these two countries, but is actually an economic, it's an economic prize for them. So the crucial question is, can there be an international agreement that basically imposes certain restrictions on what can happen during a conflict where nuclear power plants are at risk? The IAEA has a problem here because historically the IAEA has not been focused on nuclear safety issues, and so although one might think it's the appropriate agency to actually deal with this sort of situation, historically it has not dealt with safety issues. In fact, one of the great problems in the international nuclear regime is that there really are only voluntary agreements about nuclear safety worldwide. It's rather different than for example, in Europe, in particular countries. For example, the United States, the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, has the right to intervene and, for example, even issue stop work orders for utilities that are not appropriately paying attention to safety. There is no such international agreement. And in particular, one of the issues will be, just as has come up, for example, with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, of exactly how you would enforce internationally safety issues, because historically, the issue of sanctions has proven to be of limited value. Just witness what has happened, for example, with North Korea or Iran. So we are in a bit of a quandary here, exactly how to design an international treaty regime where you can really safeguard the safety aspects of nuclear power worldwide. It's something definitely worth thinking about, but it's not obvious what the right solution is. I don't think anyone has really proposed anything that really makes sense as yet.
Absolutely. Going forth, what's the way ahead to, mitigate the current crisis and also ensure that such a crisis does not arise in the future? And even if it does, the world has a solution to it, is something that I'll come to you, Dr. Kaur. But Dr. Nayan, coming to you first, because India is in a location wherein we have two hostile neighbors, both nuclear powers. This is one important, aspect that concerns us as well. How do we deal with this situation?
So we are well aware of it, and in fact, we had signed an agreement with Pakistan, one of the neighbors which we generally suspect that may do some mischief. And on 1st January, every year we exchange a list of all the nuclear facilities, and in fact, it has been working quite well. And we have given commitment that no one will attack each other's facilities. So this is taking care of the nuclear security aspect of it. As for nuclear safety, and there are other issues also regarding nuclear security, but all know this, we are neighbors. And once radiation goes, it will not discriminate. It will go beyond the boundary. So I think Pakistan or China, both are, all three, even India should be aware that there will be no discrimination by radiation done to anyone. So
but you know, Dr. Nayan, each time situations go from bad to worse between India and Pakistan, there are fears of a potential nuclear war. How valid or how serious are the risks?
Completely invalid. We all are responsible countries. We know the consequences. We know that this could be a posturing, but in reality, all know what may happen if really it starts or it takes off. So no one, even Pakistan, once India attacked last time after Balakot strike, which we had done. So we did not see any nuclear response from Pakistan. So we generally called a nuclear bluff. So we should not be unnecessarily worried about that Pakistan will attack us with nuclear weapons. We also have got nuclear weapons, and Pakistan is, of course, knowing about it, that we can retaliate. So we all know. So I think all know there is a danger involved in war. So better don't play with fire, don't play with dangers. So I think we all are aware of it. So there is nothing to worry about it. But there are matters of concern.
You also spoke about an agreement between India and Pakistan wherein we share a list of all nuclear installations on the 1st of January every year. Is that a unique agreement between India and Pakistan, that happen to be hostile neighbors, but that has helped both countries deal with the situations wherein tensions flare up between us, but then we're able to manage?
Oh, yes, very much. This has been working. Actually, this agreement was signed even when we had not become nuclear. Both countries had not become nuclear. So it has been existing since then. After both sides, India and Pakistan, became nuclear, we had several risk mitigation measures taking place. We notify each other. So I don't think there is anything to worry about nuclear issues between the two countries. Even with China, we have started having confidence building measures, and we trust China that they will not do anything mischievous. Even in Ukrainian theater, if you see that, you will find that Russia is not, I will not agree that it is really going to weaponize power plants, because it also knows its troops are stationed nearby, or they are providing physical protection. This is what they claim. And they know that first their troops will die. Of course, some Ukrainians, nuclear workers will die. So there is, I am not of the view that Russia.
Absolutely. So let's hope the situation doesn't deteriorate further.
But yeah, this is accident may take place. Shelling is taking place. It may hit anywhere. That is a matter of grave concern. So that area should be sanitized.
Certainly, and something that is going to have implications not just on the region, but the entire world as on date. Dr. Cobb, let me get in your word from you on, the nuclear safety conventions that, Dr. Rosner was speaking about. So there are multiple nuclear safety conventions that are the basis for international emergency preparedness, also response framework. But this is a very unique situation that we are witnessing, because not even one of them addresses the current situation, wherein a civil nuclear facility comes under military attack. So, in order to ensure that we deal with the current crisis as soon as possible, and to prepare a future roadmap so that this does not happen again, what is the kind of steps that you think the world leaders must, sit on the table and take for the larger good?
Well, I think we can look at the Geneva Convention statement on this, because within the Geneva Convention, there is statements there that a variety of different significant installations, not only nuclear power stations, but other power stations and other key facilities, should not be jeopardized by military attack if that is going to unleash forces that would have the threat of harming populations nearby. So there is already this Geneva Convention that states the principle of what should be happening. I think the question that needs to be asked is, what is it that would be done should this not be abided by? And that's what needs to be looked at.
Absolutely. Dr. Dorfman, I'll take one last question from you because the situation demands that the world should not sleepwalk into a disaster or, of a scale that has larger implications on not just lives, on the generations to come. How do you look at the way ahead in terms of, the world coming together to find a solution to this immediate crisis? And if at all, there is a solution to the kind of crisis that we are reeling under?
If, and that's a question, if we do get through this, it's important not to be naive, not to say everything's fine, not to be a kind of a smiling victim, as it were. If, and it's a big if, we get through this, that has significant implications for current and any plans for new nuclear. What we have seen in real time is the weaponization of civil nuclear, something that many had thought impossible. Now, there's no treaty, there's no understanding that will change that reality on the ground. And the point about nuclear is that if something goes wrong, if it goes wrong, and remember, accidents are by definition accidental, then that affects a lot of people's lives. And also a lot of people's businesses, economies, and the rest of it. So the key lesson for us in the context of Zaporizhzhia is not to be naive, not to take this on the chin, to understand that nuclear, unfortunately, is a substantive risk, and civil nuclear is unfortunately a substantive risk, and all that implies.
Absolutely, and that will have significant implications. Any kind of increased risk to nuclear facilities can have impact not just on the areas nearby, on the region, but also globally, and something that we have seen earlier on in the past as well, with Chernobyl disaster in 1986, and also with the Fukushima disaster. So there was no loss to life, but the kind of impact it had on Japan is something that we all witnessed. This is one area wherein the world needs to come together and find a solution to mitigate not just the current crisis, but also have a roadmap, a structure, an architecture to ensure that such risks do not build up in the near future as well. So that having been said, I'll have to wind up the program. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of the Global Debate on Sansad TV and sharing your thoughts, your views with us and our viewers. Absolute pleasure to have all four of you on this edition of the Global Debate today. So that's it from us on the Global Debate, viewers. Thank you for your time as well. I'll see you same time next week now with another topic and a different set of panelists. Until then, take good care of yourselves and keep watching Sansad TV.